In Everyday Same Dream, we take the place of this white-collar worker in a day-to-day commute to their office job. This game was developed for the experimental gameplay project at Carnegie Mellon University in 2009, right after the 2008 financial crisis. The game is intentionally repetitive and frustrating, challenging the player to find nonlinear disparities in the environment. You are free as a player to do as prompted each time and fall in line with what an office worker is expected to do. Turn your alarm off, get dressed, say hello to your wife, go to work, and join the many others exactly like you, over and over. One could potentially endure countless repetitions of the dream, mimicking how the working man endures his boring office job. Details like the slow walking speed and limited controls, along with the overwhelmingly gray color scheme and same song on a continuous loop, add to the monotonous tone while playing the game, making it frustrating every time the player wakes up again. You must do 5 different things in the 5 phases of the dream in order to positively impact your progress in the game. Chase down a leaf, get out of your car and pet the cow, talk to the homeless man, get fired, and jump off the office building. If you do not interact with the dream in a different way than you did before, the dream repeats itself. Making choices like getting out of the car in the middle of busy traffic and jumping off the building instead of sitting at your cubicle, you as a player are encouraged to break the cycle of the capitalist production model, forced to find solutions to a left-to-right format. Otherwise, you may not progress. According to Ian Bogo's concept of procedural logic in the rhetoric of video games are models of real and imagined systems. Not only can video games support existing social and cultural positions, but they can also disrupt and change those positions, leading to potentially significant long-term social change. The developers of Everyday Same Dream use the procedural restraints of video games to question the structured workday of the ordinary worker. In this way, the procedural logic in forcing the player to find alternate routes to the linear structure comments on the restrictive nature of life in society under late-stage capitalism. Christophe Durret states that in order to win the game, the player must avoid 3 major pitfalls which constitute the many forms of routinization of thought: the significance of behavioral scripts, functional fixedness, and mental ruts. The routine in the game calls on the behavioral scripts wake up in the morning and go to work. It is expected that the items get out of bed and get dressed figure into the procedures involved in the script to wake up in the morning. However, it is likely that responses of walk past the office without stopping, take the emergency exit, and jump off a building do not figure into the script to go to work. Therefore, a player who does not know the goals of the game will tend to rely on these scripts they have programmed, so to speak, in their memory, with which they're familiar. However, relying on the suggested scripts makes it impossible to achieve victory, since the player is expected to break the routine by adopting nonlinear behaviors. Functional fixedness refers to the lack of innovation of individual problem solving and more specifically use of tools only in light of their common usage. As part of the script Go to Work, the car is immediately seen as a way to get from home to the workplace. Its use is primarily related to work. However, the game asks the player to separate themselves from the script Go to Work and instead consider as an irrelevant recreational tool and stop in the middle of the usual route, and they can enter a meadow and pet a cow, creating an emotional connection that they are denied by other characters in the game. The petting of the cow also elicits feelings as a sort of pastoral escapism, contrasting from the confinement from the office worker in his cubicle dream. Durret continues to describe mental ruts, referring to the habit of solving a new problem by applying strategies that have been proven successful in the past, but are inappropriate or unnecessarily complicated in the current situation. To meet another condition of victory, the player must go to the left of the parking lot scene rather than the right, which leads to a new scene in which they are able to talk to a homeless person. The strategy where the player progresses is systematically moving to the right doesn't work here, to the extent that this deviation from the norm is the important goal. The overall imperative when playing this game comes in the form of an incentive to break routine by adopting unexpected behavior, to not conform, and by refusing to be a player in the economy. Work and the daily routine are alienating. To break free of this alienation, it is necessary to stop working and break the routine. The game pits alienation against freedom in a restrictive system, as well as productivity against the refusal to work, leading to the collapse of the economy. This is exemplified in how, when a victory condition is reached, the graph showing the profits of the company that employs the main character goes down. Noah Wardrip-Fruin says the logics of games aren't just ways we think about the world and how they reflect our own, but also literal ways game worlds work, through computational operations. He describes operational logics as a term for foundational elements that do cultural work, that structure our understanding, and that do so in part through how they function computationally. There are several ways that operational logics are intentionally frustrating for the player. The entity state logics prevent the player from running or walking any faster. The overall control logics are also fairly limiting, and the options only to move through life slowly and click on interactables. One frustrating procedure for me personally was the fact that as you progress through the stages, the nature of the stop-and-go traffic as you enter the car gets even worse. Furthermore, it causes you to bump into the car in front of you. For the player who frequently has breakdowns in Atlanta traffic, the gameplay experience was enough for me to bring the character to the edge of the building just because. There are few progression logics within the game, however the rest, save for some changes in dialogue and some environmental factors, remain persistent. Actions like turning the alarm or TV off become irrelevant to the outcome of the dream. This speaks to the irrelevance of repetitive actions like these. There is no effect in letting the static of the TV play as you go about your day. Interacting with your wardrobe when you wake up to get dressed serves one function: to keep you from being fired. If you choose to not get dressed, your wife tells you to get dressed once, but her second dialogue is the same one that tells you, "Come on, honey, you're late," when you're dressed in a suit and tie. Nothing stops you from choosing to walk out the door in your underwear, rejecting societal norms, and getting fired upon entering your job. However, the dream will end and start the same way in the next. The nature of this irrelevance in these actions could speak to the inescapable feeling under the current system, that even if the worker is fired, there is not much to do but find another job to repeat the game in. This work of frustration and monotony is what leads the player to desire to end the dream, to go off the beaten path and find the discrepancies in the environment. Perhaps this frustration is what inspires revolution. Everyday Same Dream effectively challenges the player to find ways out of the deceptively confining linear format of the game. By creating monotonous, repetitive gameplay experience with frustrating operational logics, the game encourages the player to walk the opposite direction and actively search for anything to do that is not laid out for them, disregarding social norms in the process. In this way, Everyday Same Dream comments on the isolating and restrictive nature of life in capitalist society. In challenging the player this way, the game asks the question, what are the ways out of the repetitive dream society has made for us?